Shalom, and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malomet in Highland Park, New Jersey at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me is the getting beardier Rabbi Barry Chesler.
Lagbomer is coming.
Okay, and you're still with the same beard, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanofsky on Chesed, New York. It's great to see you all. We have a double parsha this week, two parshas, Aharei and Kedoshim. I have to say, these are amazing parshas. They're just amazing parshas. Because every week they're amazing parshas. And we have the privilege of studying them with you. And so let's get right into it. Aharei. You know, I want to start off with this idea that the Torah is locating us in time. Vayidaber Adonai al Moshe Aharei mot shnei bnei Aaron. And so I can't help, in light of, the kinds of thinking that we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, especially after the catastrophe, that there's something going on here, that there's a story going on here, that in a way, Moshe and Aaron, they may have had a falling out. Am I reading too much into this story, or do you want to kind of...
Okay, what I would say, Elliot, is that the Torah has 70 faces, and your reading is certainly one of the 70 faces.
I give myself a face.
Yeah. So what's important here to recognize is that we can read these first few verses as an explanation of what happened to Nadav and Avihu, that they entered the Kodesh HaKodeshim at the wrong time, since that's the commandment that is going to come here. But the other thing that occurs to me when you were talking about the family drama is that the death of Nadav and Avihu was not just a personal catastrophe, it was a national catastrophe.
Sure.
And the sin that has to be atoned for is not just the sin that we speculate about Nadav and Avihu, but the sin of the community for having Nadav and Avihu in their midst and then suddenly taken from them.
And so I guess, that obviously spreads. Certainly, their death spreads a kind of avot tumah in the sanctuary, the height of tumah, desolation in the sanctuary, and that has to be purged also, and the sanctuary needs to be re-cleansed from this. But Jeremy, you have a take on this?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a. 2 or 3 weeks ago when we were discussing this, you espoused, Elliot, a strong reading of the enormous import of following the rules and not improvising, and stressing the precision that the priestly, Torah Kohanim, the priestly style of worship demands. And Nadav and Avihu, they obviously at one level or another deviated. However we want to interpret it. And so the sort of a classical way of reading of this is, guys, this is hugely, hugely important, and don't screw around with it. And so, treat this ritual like it's nuclear, because it is nuclear. I love the way you kind of humanize this story and not just make it a kind of a preachy polemic about the performance of the duty. You located it in the story of the relationship of Moses and Aaron. I think that's great.
I think so. I think God is trying to nudge them together here. I think given the fact that there was such a rupture in the relationship, and that I think that residue lingers on. Look, we see it all the time in family relationships where, bad things, hard things, harsh things are stated between one or another parties in the family, and these things go on. They don't go away so easily. They stay on.
So what's interesting, Elliot, is that some families have the tendency to paper over those disagreements. Right. And, now that you raise the issue, if we want to go through the Torah, we can find lots of places where Moses and Aaron butt heads.
Indeed.
And
okay. So let's
not resolved always. Yeah. And, there's that tension that lurks beneath the surface, and that the Torah itself doesn't quite know what to do with. It doesn't write it out entirely, but it also doesn't explain what's clearly a problem.
I think there's a subtext here. Okay, so the text itself goes into atonement, the rituals of atonement, And what happens in the ritual atonement, just briefly, sacrifices, and you'll recall from the Avodah service at Yom Kippur. This is the passage that is read, and of course it's elaborated in the Mishnah and embellished by the Machzor. You know, the goats, 2 goats, one that goes as a sacrifice, one that gets a crimson cord. It's not in the Torah here with the crimson, but you put a crimson thread around the goat, and you send it off with a slow-moving guy, and basically it's out in the wilderness. And this is where Aaron places both his hands on the goat's head, and the sins are possessed by the goat goes. And then we get the culminating verse. Who would like to read the culminating verse? Barry, you want to get that for us? Because it came as a question.
Okay.
Kivayom hazeh, 30.
Right, I just Kivayom hazeh yechaper alechem l'taher etchem mikol chatotechem lefnei Adonai titaru.
Yeah.
So, with this day you will atone and purify, and you will be purified from all the sins before God. You shall become purified.
I can't hear that without chazanas, okay?
I know, I was going to say the same thing.
Kivayom hazeh, with real kvetching, real stuff in there. Bowing, everything. So, okay, so what is kapara? What is atonement? This came to us as a question from one of our loyal viewer listeners. Right?
So why don't you give the first answer?
I think, look, atonement, it's all about the sense that the sanctuary has been polluted. Your sins pollute the sanctuary. And what Yom Kippur does is enables us the chance to wipe the slate clean. That is, you were originally wiping the slate of the sanctuary, literally, doing the spiritual cleansing. Of course, it evolved to the spiritual and emotional and moral cleansing of every individual. The sense that you now have access. I think that's kapara.
The in the massive commentary on Leviticus written by Professor Jacob Milgram, he defines chatat, the kind of sacrifice, not as a sin offering, but as a purification offering.
Yeah.
And lehit chateh is to purify. So it's not really that it may be that you've done a sin. The sin may be the source of the impurity, but the point of a chatat, which the different kinds of, we talked about it as Vayikra began, the different kinds of sacrifices and the different kinds of things that are done with different kinds of chataot. Sometimes the blood may be placed on the incense altar, which is sort of within the Mishkan, and sometimes the blood may be kind of smeared on the Mizbach HaOlah, the offering, the altar where the animals are sacrificed. But in either case, something has happened, and in this religion, in its ancient form, there was a kind of blood atonement, and an animal blood was smeared and spritzed in prescribed places, and that was seen to counteract like the accumulated impurity. And what I think is really the deep part of this, there's a couple of ways of looking at it. There may be, obviously Vayikra has a very well-developed sense of which kinds of substances and which kinds of animals and which kinds of behaviors create a ritual impurity. And if you're bearing one of those, if you touched this or that substance, or you've come in contact with a dead body or a dead animal body or whatever it is, and then you go to the mikdash, then you go to the sanctuary, you have brought that miasma of impurity with you. Right. But what gets really interesting in Vayikra, and the sort of academic scholars will kind of extract one voice from another in Vayikra, is that sometimes there really seems to be focused on that particular ritual impurity that accumulates in the sacred space. And sometimes it seems to be focused much more on what I think we in a modern time think about the accumulated sin it's not just that you touched a lizard and went into the temple. It's that you lied and you stole and you abused and you took advantage of people. And that too is seen to accumulate as if it were like a grime or a dust in the sacred place. And that's really religiously meaningful. Like the bad stuff that we do, it's meaningful. It sticks with us, and we got to do something to counteract it.
You said before, that the sanctuary is not detached from life. The messiness of life gets to intrude from time to time in the sanctuary. The sanctuary is not this, the Holy of Holies is a place that's not accessible to everyone except for the Kohen Gadol. But the temple was a place where everybody came. You can't have a temple without people. You can't have a religion without people. And when people come, mixed dancing is going to go out. I don't know.
I want to make another point here. And that is that the question was based on the distinction the rabbis make between the sins against other people and the sins against God. And God will only forgive us if we first made our peace with our fellow human beings. And I think that strikes us as both reasonable and religiously meaningful. But I sometimes wonder if we don't lose sight that the purpose of making peace with our fellow is not for the sake of making peace with our fellow, but because what we really need is to be right with God. And Yom Kippur really is to focus our souls and our spiritual yearnings on our own relationship with God, that is of ultimate importance. And just like we deny ourselves food and drink so we can concentrate more fully, we also have to take care of those sins against other people so that we can really concentrate on our relationship with God, because we don't want those things to be gnawing at us when we have to address the Kadosh Baruch Hu on Yom Kippur.
So I think that theme of closest to God is gonna be really important to us in the second parsha of this week, Kedoshim, and we'll get to that in 2 seconds, because before that we have a rather lengthy description of the permitted and prohibited, or more like the prohibited sexual relationships. I mean, that starts with a preamble. Don't be like Egyptians and don't be like Canaanites, but you have to do do my rules, and mishpatai ta'asu, chokotai tishmeru, keep my regulations, and then bet mishpatai asher yaseh otam adam v'chayva, do my rules v'chayva, and live by them, live and not die by them. And the idea is that we are creating a sense of our lives, our intimate lives in holiness, in contradistinction to the way that the Egyptians and the Canaanites live, where everything kind of goes.
So this was a comment on pop music from the 1980s. Don't walk like an Egyptian.
Don't walk like an Egyptian. Exactly.
Remember that song, Walk Like an Egyptian?
Yeah, I remember.
The Bangles.
So
don't do it though. Don't walk like an Egyptian.
Don't walk. Don't be like them. In a way, the idea that Israel is to have a distinctive behavioral life, and a distinctive sexual life, and a distinctive family life is what Vayikra is trying to chart out for us. It's trying to chart for us a sense that family means a set of relationships that are inviolable in terms of sexuality.
No, I think that when people are not positively disposed towards religion, nowadays, when people think, that religion does, all kinds of this, that, and the other harm, I think one of the things that they think about is religion is always judgmentally looking down and prying into people's bedrooms and with a really mean-spirited way wants to control sexuality. Religion's really scared of sexuality and is kind of in this obsessively not very human way, or not very humane way. There's all kinds of rules and disapproving and shame-inducing, and I don't think that that's right. I think that actually these rules, obviously, in the world that we live in, there is a huge and valuable critique of the classical Judaism's very negative attitude towards, certainly towards male homosexuality, and somewhat less, somewhat reduced level to female homosexuality. And so those things come up to us, and I think people like, yeah, I don't want to talk about this. This is not something that I want to come to synagogue about or think is religiously meaningful. It's oppressive rather than ennobling. So let's just bracket for a moment, if we can, the questions about same-sex relationships and same-sex behaviors, because I do think that is an important critique and a challenge. And I think that promoting rules about sexuality which restrain abuse, which nurture relationships of care, I think is hugely important. There's a woman in my shul who, she's doing something a little bit different now, but for a long time she worked with trafficked women. And she said that when people sent from Asia or Latin America to the United States to work as prostitutes, she would ask them, and if they denied that they had been sexually abused by a family member, she didn't believe them because it was so pervasive. Yeah. And so I feel like rules in which the Torah, speaking in the name of God, stands up and says, this is not an appropriate relationship among blood relatives or marital relatives. I think that's good. I think that's really important.
But I would go perhaps a step further. I think what the Torah is really concentrating on is relationships. For a lot of us, at various times of our life, sex is about physical feeling and not about a relationship. And what the Torah cautions us is that sex has to be part of a relationship. And the reason why we don't allow these things, they're not talking about people who are having relationships with these close relatives. They're talking about people having sex. And a lot of times that sex is one way.
Yeah.
Right? The person is interested in their own pleasure and not the other person's.
Yes. So here, basically, the Torah is creating a structure around the intimate life, and by prohibiting relationships that primarily exist within the family or the clan unit. It's saying basically here, this is how a holy nation behaves. This nation has to maintain its propriety in its intimate relationships.
Because I think that it is, first of all, I agree with everything you guys said. It is about a kind of a natural history of relationships. If you are somebody's parent, you cannot be their parent if you are also their sexual partner, right? If you are somebody's sibling, that is a certain kind of relationship. It's healthy, it's really important in life, and it's damaged if you are also their sexual partner. So I think there is much wisdom in these prohibitions, and I really hope that people don't just sort of write them off and say, it's the uptight, it's the uptight, judgy, nasty, religious authorities telling people how to behave. I think that's not correct.
No, and in truth, in our communities, and we all have examples of it, this damage is lifelong. This damage continues beyond one generation. We see it, within the Jewish community, we see it beyond. And so there's what to be said here, for these rules and the laws that are stated here. And then, of course, the Torah then moves into Kedoshim. We get into our second Parsha. We used to talk about be holy, be a blessing, be holy, choose life. This is be holy. This is the center of the Torah. And we often, take that word for granted, be holy. So I want to offer this interpretation. This comes from Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz, who said that holiness is about relationship, basically proximity to God, that you are being close to God in being holy. and that when the verse says Kedoshim to you, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem, be holy, for I the Lord am holy. It's really a way of saying, come close to me because I want to come close to you. That might be nice poetics. It might be one face of the 70 faces of Torah. Of course, there are other meanings of holiness. I would invite you to offer us any other or concur with this definition of holiness. Jeremy, start with you.
I would say that that the holy, it's really, I find it, I find it a little hard to give a sort of a expository definition of this word.
Yeah.
It is a feeling, and it's very, if somebody practices Judaism, I think that they get a sense that certain times, certain places, certain objects are holy beyond simply being what we would consider good. I do not want to say in religion that ethics is the sum total of what is really important, right? I think that lots of people and lots of cultures and people coming from different cultures, they can all be good and they can have ethics. I do not think that, certainly it's obvious the Jews are not the only ethical people in the world, and people can do all kinds of good things and also be unholy. There's a thing going on in Israel right now with an ultra-Orthodox guy who I actually met many years ago, who was a really interesting guy. He used to, as a younger man, he was like one of the rock throwers at people who violated Shabbat. He was such a fanatic. Then he went on to found the Zakah, the people who pick up the pieces of human bodies after accidents, and did so much good in the world. He really did an enormous amount of good in the world, and he also happened to have been a terrible sexual abuser, right?
He tried to commit suicide.
He just tried to commit suicide.
Yeah.
So people can do good things and be unholy. I think that holiness is that sense that it is something, some object, some place, some moment is very, very special and is worthy of being in the presence of God. And, Kedoshim to you, ki kadosh ani, you be holy for I am holy, means that something resembles God. There's some fundamental commonality. And when we say that Shabbat or the Torah scroll or Yom Kippur or a certain kind of building, or like the Beit HaMikdash, or in a small way our synagogues, is holy, we mean that it is worthy of being a connector to the divine.
Very.
So I'm reminded of my late teacher, Rabbi Byron Sherwin, who liked to talk about the paradoxes in Judaism. And one of the basic paradoxes is God as transcendent and as immanent. And I think most of us associate holiness with the transcendent. It's something that's beyond us. But there's also an immanent part of holiness, such as we experience on Shabbat, where we can taste the holiness of Shabbat or feel the holiness of Shabbat, but that also does not endure. So we're dissatisfied sometimes with the transcendent because it's too far away, but the immanent we can't hold forever. We have to learn how to let it go. And so we're struck with this balance between what we call in English the secular and the holy, the chol and the kadosh. And, I was reminded when we started this part of the conversation, what does that expression mean when God says, I am holy? On one hand, of course, the way theologians think of God is he is completely separate. Rudolf Otto famously said the holy other. But that holy other invites us into his presence. And that is where holiness exists, where we are invited to be part of God's presence.
We can pick up on almost every verse in chapters 19 and 20, which has the title, the Holiness Code. But from what you said, Barry, just now, the first verse of the Holiness Code is exactly, Shabbat and parents. Ish imo v'aviv tira'u v'et shabtotai tishmoro. Of course, is an echo of the Ten Commandments, Commandments 4 and 5. 4 being Shabbat, 5 being your parents. But what you said, I think, resonates very deeply. Your holiness is to be found precisely in those very imminent relationships, the family relationship, the honor and reverence to parents, and in Shabbat, which is the indescribable sense of peace that one gets as, in the moment of rest, in the moment of sanctity of all the relationships.
Leviticus 9, all of Leviticus 19 and 20 in the way that you're saying, is so central here because it is such an important expansion and addition to the rest of Leviticus, which is, as we said, is about what we call tumat mikdash v'kodashav, the impurity or the purification of the sacred space and all of its accoutrements. And then Kedoshim comes along here and says, and don't lie and don't steal and don't trip up the vulnerable and don't curse those who can't defend themselves and do not falsify your weights and measures. Be honest in business. And so with Parshat Kedoshim, we locate what is holy. Not only this is not against the idea that the Mikdash is special. This section of the book does believe the Mikdash is really important, but it locates holiness in the community, and it says, speak to the Kol Adat B'nai Israel, right? The entire community of the children of Israel is very expansive language. It's got a big crashing cymbal of importance. If you could have a musical thing, you'd hear the cymbals crash, and say, now this building's holy, yes, but you guys have to be holy as well in your behaviors with each other, in your worshipful behaviors, in your sexual behaviors, in your ethical behaviors. You want to craft this life such that it matches the holiness. And I do want to add, you Elliot, you said something very, very on point earlier in our conversation when you mentioned our fuzzy senior colleague here. It also says, don't shave your beards. So the three of us here, and I think let me find the pasuk here. Lo takifu pa'at roshchem velo tashchit pa'at zekanecha. Do not destroy don't shave your head. Don't have a certain kind of haircut, which is not supposed to be okay, and do not destroy the corners of your face. Right. So you're supposed to live
19 verse 26:7. Yeah.
Yes. And then it says, and then it goes on and says, no tattoos. So if our readers are listening, if our audience is listening, no tattoos, please.
No tattoos. Well, do we want to get into that? Tattoos. It's like a taboo in Judaism. We have lots of feeling about that. Of course, you go to Israel today, and Israel is one of the most tattooed countries, which is it's the irony of irony.
And you think, and of course, people. I do not think that anybody who gets a tattoo is consciously I don't, desecrating the memories of the millions of forced tattoos that Jews underwent in the last century. But I can't kind of not feel like they forced tattoos on us. I don't want tattoos, but I know some people feel like they're sort of reclaiming the tattoos.
It's that. It's also the body. It's the culture of the body, and Israel really has given a body to the Jewish people.
Well, it's a Mediterranean country after all.
I'm sorry?
It's a Mediterranean country after all.
Yeah, they just know how to live there, I think, right? Look, I always say, and the tomatoes are fantastic.
The weather's pretty good, too.
The weather's pretty good. Listen, they're doing really well.
You can't beat the falafel.
Exactly.
Oh my God, in the shakshuka. Yikes.
We are talking about the land. Of course, that's the Holy Land. But let's just dial back for a couple of verses. The Torah tells us that we should not hate our brother in our hearts, right? Reproach, or if you got a problem, talk about it. I was listening to Ilana Stein-Haynes. She's a wonderful teacher, and she was saying that this passage here, beginning with Lo telech rachil be'amecha, do not be a talebearer among your people. She says the echoes of the Joseph story are in this passage. Fascinating.
Nice.
They
Yeah.
should put that on in the U.S. Capitol
Okay, go ahead.
and on all the stationery that Congress people and senators send out.
Yeah, a just society, a society that really is committed to one another, really has to be careful about how it spreads its information about each other. I think that, you know, we are so influenced. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, zehu klal gadol b'Torah. This is the great principle of the Torah. Of course, you know, in Hillel, what is hateful to you, do not do unto your neighbor. That's the Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. Of course, you know, we want to reduce the Torah to a single principle. This would be it. But this principle comes within a whole context.
Right, and the context is not bearing a grudge or taking vengeance.
Well, wait, that's not. I mean, obviously, that's the preceding clause, but this two verses has the four elements. Don't hate, rebuke if you have to, or talk out your problems. Don't bear a grudge. Learn to love. I think that is just. It's the most wonderful, most finely wrought on a literary level. It is beautiful and poetic. On a religious level, like this is, and this is why this parsha is so great. This is about shaping your personality. Because this is not like, don't eat pig is also a mitzvah, and you know, don't wear shatnez is also a mitzvah. I'm not saying that those are not important, but these two verses appear to answer the question, like, what kind of human being are you going to be? You got to get rid of your heart. You got to get rid of the hatred in your heart. You've got to deal with the inevitable conflicts that come up. Yeah. You're going to be honest about them, but you're not going to bear a grudge about them. And in that method, you're going to do not hate, deal with your problems, learn to love.
And what's important here is that it's codified as law, because our natural inclination is to do otherwise. And we've all been in situations where we have done otherwise, and we had wonderful justifications for our correct behavior, which the Torah clearly says is wrong, because the Torah standard is higher than our natural inclinations.
So one of the things that Ilana Stein-Hain says in her teaching, and things that I've done in the past with this, is she translates V'ahavta as loyalty. That it's not that it's impossible to have an emotional relationship with everyone. Indeed, it's probably impossible to have it with beyond the circle of the people that are closest to you, but you certainly can feel loyal. You can feel loyal to your kinsmen, and that loyalty is a driving shaper of your behavioral life, right?
This is really interesting to me because loyalty is very high on my hierarchy of values. Virtues. I really feel strongly about loyalty, and I think about loyalty given, like the fact that the Minneapolis police chief testified against Derek Chauvin, when one of the problems in this country is that the blue wall of silence is in fact like loyalty on steroids, right? We are colleagues, we are a team, and so I'm going to defend you even when you're wrong. And if you were to say to me, do you think that loyalty in your family, in your clan, means you're sticking with somebody even when they're wrong? I would say, yeah, that's it. But I recognize that on steroids, that can be really destructive. So I think that the hocheach tochiach et amitecha, be willing to rebuke the people that you love, be willing to wrestle with the wrong things that people do, even when you love them, is the sort of necessary corrective.
So she makes exactly that point. She says that you rebuke the people that you love. If you have a commitment to people, if you are loyal to people, you will upbraid, or you will reproach, or you will speak.
So two things need to be said here. First of all, is the use of the word re'ah is very important.
Yeah.
That is someone who is close to you, right? In other words, one way to read it is you're supposed to make people as close to you as yourself, and then you can love them.
Yeah.
But the other thing that we often forget is that later on in the same chapter is the commandment to love the stranger.
Right.
And that is in some ways more important than loving the neighbor as yourself, because we have an inclination to love our neighbor. And as we see in the news, we also have inclinations to hate the stranger.
Indeed. We don't want to leave it on hate, but we do have to put the bow on this, where we reached our time to the end. The parsha ends with the notions of holiness, Havdalah, that we have a unique mission in the world. We have a new position.
So we could conclude with the third commandment to love, which is in the Torah,
Yeah.
which comes in Sefer Devarim, which is v'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. We're supposed to love God with all of our being, and it's by loving the neighbor as ourselves and loving the stranger that we learn how to love God.
Indeed. What a great way to end this.
That was awesome.
Parsha show. We want to thank you all for watching and being with us for this time. If you're doing your Shabbos cooking or whatever else you're doing, we're so happy to share this time with you. On behalf of my colleagues, I want to say Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
See you
Shalom.
next week. Shabbat Shalom.